Julian sat at the center of the table, the light of 100 candles reflecting off the gold coins scattered across the wood like spilled grain. He did not look at the total. He did not look at the ledger. He simply waved a hand, and a heavy purse of silver slid across the table. The room erupted in cheers. Julian laughed, his voice rising above the clatter of crystal and the roar of the crowd. He ordered more wine, his fingers drumming against the table as if the supply of gold were as infinite as the air he breathed. Around him, companions leaned in, their faces flushed with the heat of the feast, whispering praise that fueled his reckless rhythm. He tossed another purse, the leather thudding against the floorboards, and never once glanced at the door. He lived for the sharp electric thrill of the moment, convinced that the well would never run dry. The wine flowed, the silver vanished. He was the master of the feast, and as long as the gold kept moving, he believed the world would never stop spinning in his favor. The laughter died out with the last of the wine. One by one, the guests slipped through the heavy oak doors, their pockets heavy with silver, leaving Julian alone in the sudden, ringing silence. He reached for his ledger, but his hand found only dust. The gold was gone. The coins had been spent, the silver traded for empty praise, and the well had finally run dry. Julian stood in the center of his grand hall, the air turning sharp and biting as the fire in the hearth flickered once and surrendered to the ash. He walked from room to room, his footsteps echoing against bare floorboards. He sold the heavy mahogany chairs, the imported rugs, and the silver-framed mirrors until the mansion felt like a hollow shell. He stood by the window, watching the sky transform into a bruised, leaden gray. The wind rattled the glass, and he pulled his arms tight against his chest to trap the fading heat. His horses were gone. His jewelry was gone. He reached into his pockets, but they were empty, save for the lint of his former life. He shivered, his breath blooming in the freezing air. A sudden, frantic flutter of wings against the glass broke the silence. Julian jerked his head toward the window. A single swallow darted through the icy, swirling air. He pressed his face against the pane, his eyes tracking the bird. "A swallow!" he shouted, the sound cracking in the hollow room. "Spring is finally here!" The thought took root, blooming into a feverish, irrational certainty. He ignored the frost creeping across the floorboards. He reached for the heavy, fur-lined layer draped over his shoulders and tore it from his frame. He sprinted into the street. He shoved the material into a merchant's hands and snatched the few coins offered in return. He did not count them. "I do not need this anymore," he muttered, his teeth clattering like stones. The warmth is coming. He stood in the center of the square, eating with frantic, shaking hands, convinced that the sun would rise hot and golden by morning. The sky did not turn golden. Instead, the night brought a howling, white-out blizzard that swallowed the city whole. The wind screamed through the narrow alleyways, tearing at the fabric of his thin, ragged shirt. Julian stumbled, his feet sliding on the slick, frozen cobblestones. He reached for the warmth he had promised himself, but found only the biting sting of ice. He looked up, squinting through the swirling, blinding snow, searching for the swallow. The air was empty. There was no bird. There was no spring. The sky was a void of life, indifferent and vast. His limbs began to lock, the joints stiffening. He dragged himself toward the nearest shelter, a rough stone wall that offered no heat, only a brief respite from the gale. He curled into a tight ball, pressing his face against the cold, unyielding rock. His fingers turned white, then blue, then numb. The shivering stopped, replaced by a terrifying, heavy lethargy. He stared at his trembling, empty hands, the weight of his foolishness settling in. Julian stared at his trembling, empty hands. The frost settled on his shoulders, heavy and absolute. He watched the passers-by, wrapped in thick layers, hurrying past without a glance toward the man sinking into the snow. The realization cut deeper than the wind. He had traded his survival for a single bird, a fleeting sign he had mistaken for a season. The swallow was gone, and the summer he gambled his life to find was a lie. He looked up at the sky, but it remained a biting, indifferent gray. The lesson became clear as his heartbeat slowed. One swallow does not make a summer. A life built on impulsive guesses was destined to freeze. The blizzard roared, and the world faded into the cold, silent white.